I've been using React with TypeScript for quite a while now, and there's so many little gotcha moments where you type in something that looks like it should be correct, and TypeScript throws errors all over the place. So hopefully this will be like a cheat sheet for everything TypeScript and React. I'll even list all the chapters down in the description, so you can just click wherever you need to go and refer back whenever you want to. And without further ado, let's get started. So I've just set up a very basic Next.js 13 app, and the two dependencies that we need for TypeScript to work are these two, @types React and @type/React DOM. Obviously, you'll need React and React DOM for React to work, and Next if you're working with Next.js. The other important thing is we'll need a tsconfig.json file, and there's a whole bunch of complex stuff going on in here. You can probably just copy one from a template. I might do a future video on what each of these things are, but for now, you don't have to worry too much about this. All your functional components should be called .tsx, all your previous JSX files, and all your previous JS files should now be called .ts. .tsx allows us to define things like HTML code within this without TypeScript screaming at us. So if I just put a .ts here, it's going to say all of this is invalid. No idea what this is, so make sure you put .tsx and all will be good. Next, we can create a custom component, so let's call it header component, and it takes in a title and spits out a h1 with the title. You can already see that TypeScript is giving me an error saying binding element title has any type. Since we haven't explicitly given a type, this is now saying it's any, which is terrible in TypeScript. So we want to say that this is a string. And we can just do this inline here, which is the messier approach in my opinion, but for small components it works perfectly fine. And then we just pass in header component. You can see here that now property title is missing. So basically title is required here. So if I pass in the title, it should be all good. And there we go, all errors are gone. However, if we try to pass in anything other than a string, it'll also tell us type number is not assignable to string, fix your code. So 123 works as well as a string. This is the slightly messier approach. As I said, we could also extract this type. So let's call it header props and just create it like so. And instead of passing it here, we can then define it like this. And this React.fc means React.functionalComponent, and you can see here that it takes in a generic P, which defaults to an empty object. So basically P is nothing, there's no props by default, but we are now giving it this P header props, so these are the props. Now what if we didn't want the title to be a required parameter? Say this title could be anything or it defaults to hello. So here we could just put a question mark and now the title doesn't have to be passed in. But if we do pass it in, it'll replace this hello here, or even better, we could use this. And so now if it takes in a title, it'll display that title, otherwise it'll just display hello. So let's remove this and it should display hello. Obviously it's not a good idea to just dump all your components in here, so we're just going to create a separate one called header component here and chuck in the code. And here I would just call it props because there's nothing else here, and that should work once we import it in. Just a side note, if you are making a public library or you want anyone to extend your code, it would be better for you to use an interface because they are much easier to extend, and I would once again give this header component props. Give it a proper name so someone could extend it easily. And what I mean by that is if they say they have their own header, they could just easily do extends and then build whatever they want off your component easily. Obviously you can do this with types, but I know it's a more common practice to use interface. When you're working with objects in React and you want to do, say, an array of objects, you could define it like so. And then when we pull the user's prop into our component, you can see that we get perfect typing. So the ID has a number, user.name, and we can even see when we're trying to add these things, it gives us the correct autocomplete. What's better yet, we could give it a specific role, so let's say admin or user role. And if we try to add that in again, you can see that we have the role coming up under the autocomplete. And if we try to compare it, we'll see we can only compare it with admin or user. Let's say we try to compare this with anything else. You can see here it says the comparison appears to be unintentional because the types admin or user and super user have no overlap. So even correct those errors there, which is really great. If you want to create a component that can take in other components as a child, you can pass in children like so. The type we give it is a React node. Once again, You can see here that this is a React node. If you don't want to do this React dot, you can also import it from React like so. Now you can see if I try to just import the component, let's say probably children is missing. So if we give it anything here, let's just throw in a div. You can see everything is happy. So this children component just takes in any sort of React or any other functional component in it. You could, of course, make it an optional parameter by putting the question mark again, and then we can do this just fine. The next thing I'm going to talk about is useState. And in general, I like to put a type in front of it all the time, so I know exactly what I'm passing in. And if I don't put anything in here, it defaults to string or undefined. So if I look at message, it's just a string or undefined. So it's always a good thing to put in a string here, and then it's strictly a string. And you can see here, if I don't pass in anything, it just infers the type from here. So by default, it's just undefined. If I put a number, you can see this is a number. Hello, this is a string. But in general, I like to explicitly say this and then pass something in, say an empty string. And then here I can only pass in strings. Like what we did before with the role of the user, we could do the same thing here. So let's say type user role equals admin or user. We could pass this type in here as well. And you can see that now we can only pass those two things in and we get great autocomplete once again. So let's say you click the button to become an admin and you start as a user. That's how you could do that. You could also just throw in something like the empty string if you wanted to start as nothing, or even null or undefined. But if you do undefined, you don't even have, you can just leave it like that and it works. Now let's say we wanted to separate everything into a separate button and we wanted to pass the message and set message as props. How could we do that? So we can then take this new component called state button and pass in the message and set message as props. So in here, what we have to do is message will be user role, but the set message is a funny one. So set message will be react.dispatch, and in here react.setStateAction, and then the thing we want to set. Obviously, you could remove all these React dots, but then you have to import them from React at the top, like so. And you'll end up with dispatch, setStateAction, and then the role. So when you're using useState, this is how you pass it down as a prop. And here you can see I'm passing in the set message and has all the correct types. I can also mouse over this if I was curious where I got this from. I actually just moused over one day, saw that it takes in dispatch, set state action, and the user role, and passed that in, and it worked. So in doubt, in TypeScript, if you have no idea what to pass down, mouse over the thing you want to look at, that you want to pass as a prop, and copy it. Let's say we wanted to pass a function from one component to another. So in this example, we have this passing function, which then will pass handle click to our function component down here. And in here, we want to take in a handle click. So in our types, we basically put this. We don't put this, which is a mistake I used to make. We just do the brackets goes to void. So this is what you take in, the parameters, and this is what is returned. And if you mouse over this, you'll see that we are returning void, and we are taking in this. If it's a function that returns something, say a string, then in here we should also put string. Also, if we wanted to pass in some sort of parameters, so let's say message string, in here we should also put in the string as the parameters. And you can see here, this is exactly what I've put down there. Obviously, as I've always done before, if we wanted an optional thing, we just have to do the same thing. Just make sure both your functions look the same on both sides. Now, when we're working with actual HTML elements, for example, the button here, if we want to pass in an onClick or an on something, we can look in here and we can see that this takes in a mouse event handler with a HTML button element generic. So instead of doing what we did before, we actually have to pass in, put here, mouse event handler, which we import from React. You can see there's no errors on this side. And also up here, just to be sure, we put it up here. And now in here, we get the proper autocorrect for everything that's a HTML button. You can do this with all HTML elements. I'm not going to go through every single one, but just to show you how I would do any one. Here's a form, and I have an onSubmit. You can see that this type is form event handler with the HTML form element. So once again, just put this here. And you'll see here we can even do read or prevent default. Everything comes up by itself. Just one last thing before I wind this video up. I just want to show you how we can pass in a default component. So let's say we're not really sure if this random number is coming in as a prop. So I'm going to say this is a question mark, but somewhere in my code I'm using this and it needs to be a number. It needs to be something. It could be 0, it could be 1, it has to be something but not undefined. As you can see here, random number is possibly undefined, which means my calculate something that has to be a number is throwing an error. So what we can do here is just throw in an equals 0, and this will mean this is always defined in our code. We can safely use this wherever we want, and we don't have to pass anything in, so that's all good. So that's all for this one. We've gone through everything pretty quickly, but I hope this quicker pace is what people are looking for. I tried to break down things as much as I could, and I know I've missed some things like use ref and use context, for example, but those are lesser used, I would say. So maybe in a future video, if you need me to do something on that, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.